can you guys all hear me? Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. So first off, thank you for being here in person and also many of us joining online. I first want to acknowledge that today is a really difficult day and challenging day for many of us. But I think I'm really happy that we're all here together to really support and take care of each other. So I'm really honored to be here. And my name is Song-Jae Lee. People call me Jay. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a professor in residence in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavior Sciences. At the David Geffen School of Medicine, I co-lead the Health Equity and Translational Social Science Research team, along with my, yes. Hello? Okay. So I co-lead the Health Equity and Translational Social Science team, along with my colleague, Alma Guerrero, Dr. Alma Guerrero from the Department of Pediatrics. So today I'm so honored to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Steve Shoptaw. Just on a personal note, I got to know Steve 25 years ago through this NIMH-funded Center for HIV Identification, Prevention, and Treatment Services. And since then, so we were much, much younger then. But since then, he's been such a great mentor. I would say that he's master educator, thought leader, paradigm shifter, if that's a word, status quo disruptor. But most importantly, I think he's just a wonderful human being who's so kind and generous. And he's really committed to elevating the next generation of scholars, often underrepresented in medicine. So such an honor to welcome him here today. And before I turn it over, I have some prepared remarks to showcase his accomplishments. So Steve has devoted his career in addressing the urgent issues of addiction and HIV treatment, particularly among communities most impacted by stimulant use. His work has brought tremendous benefits to those facing the highest rates of methamphetamine use, HIV, and overdose. Steve embodies the principles that the health of those with the least affects the health of all. And this belief is evident not only in his research and mentoring, but also in his service. For the past nearly 2 decades, Steve volunteered as the executive director of Safe House, a facility that provides critical housing and care for people living with HIV, substance use, and mental health disorders. He takes this to the next level, using a mobile clinic to reach those who are unstably housed, overcoming barriers like transportation to provide truly integrated care for addiction and infectious diseases. Steve was recently honored with the UCLA Public Health Impact Award. Obviously, his impact on public health is profound. His dedication to building the public's health with compassion, science, and humility is an inspiration to us all. So please help me and join me in welcoming Dr. Steve Shoptaw.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jay. That was very kind, warm introduction. I'm glad that this is taped because I want to play that for my family. So today I'm going to be talking about leveraging research to shift practice, practitioners, and community. Much of what Jay said is true. I do work with people who have very little. And I'm very comfortable with that. These are my folks. And one of the take homes from this talk today is that it is important in science to understand who your people are. Some of us have voice and others don't. I would point out that today is a difficult day and I appreciate everyone who came out. But for people who I represent, it's just another Wednesday afternoon. So, and it's going to be another Wednesday afternoon for 4 more years. So get over it, folks. This is, we need to move on. And the reason why is because when it is dark, it is upon us to bring light. This is our calling. This is what we need to do. So I'll allow you 1 day to feel bad. And then tomorrow, I expect each of you back at work full time, doing what you should be doing. So with all due respect, I'll move on. So I do have disclosures. I work with pharmaceutical companies. I love pharmaceutical companies. They give me drug and matching placebo, and it lets me do what I want to do, which is to bring the cutting edge treatments to people who don't have anything. So today's objectives, we're going to talk about how those of us in the room can successfully impact research, treatment, and communities and policy by using evidence-based strategies that can range from practice improvement, from observational studies, from community-based research, from randomized controlled trials and policy to change the way that care is delivered. And then also, I want to, throughout this time, empower individuals to use evidence to increase your impact wherever you are, provided within the setting, within the practice, and within the communities. One of the things about being a clinical psychologist and in studying treatments is to be able to understand that no matter what the science says, the person who's sitting across from you is experiencing life and troubles, and whatever you're selling may not work for them, probably won't work for them. And so the question is, you know, as we develop treatments, can we be humble in understanding that the number needed to treat of 8 means you have to go through 7 other people to get the one person that you're going to get the response for. So that actually is a challenge not only to the treatments, but it's also a treatment to us. Instead of us thinking about, you'd be good with this treatment or you'd be good with that treatment, we as providers need to shift to thinking from a population health perspective. If we have effective treatments in the bag, we should use them. We should learn from what doesn't work and move forward by bringing in things that might work instead. My entire career, I've developed with my group, and I see some of you here today. Thank you for coming to support me, to leverage the resource of science to bring high impact, cutting edge treatment research on addictions, HIV, and related comorbidities, especially in communities with healthcare disparities. I will tell you something, I'm still learning. As old as I am, I still learn. So there are things to learn about people with methamphetamine use disorder that I don't know today, and I'm continuing to learn. Like one of the things, if there's somebody in here who knows about ophthalmology, so there's a thing that goes on with continued high dose exposure of methamphetamine to some eye damage. But if you know that, please come find me because I do have some questions. But the issue of, you know, my values to do this work is based on integrity, scientific rigor, teamwork, and service. And Jay, what you said when you were introducing me, it's really nice that you said that because I could pick out the words. It was great. You didn't have the slides to write this. That's great. So I am what you would call academically promiscuous. So there are people who I will work. There are very few people who I won't work with, and most people get to sit at the table and I learn from them. And I've had to do sort of like, as I've moved into this August period of my career, I've had to kind of think about, how did I do this? And actually the way I did it was by building a table and having a lot of chairs at it and finding people to sit at it. These included people from universities, scientists, mentees, learners from hospitals, intensive medical settings, primary care clinics, from science, NIMH, NIDA, other institutes, community agencies and stakeholders, patients, a lot of patients. I hear a lot of stories. There's a lot of people's voices in my brain. Community advisory boards, pharma, I talked about that. Science networks, things like the Clinical Trials Network at NIDA, HPTN, ACTG from NIAID. And then funders, including public health, national, state, county levels, and foundations. The one person who's not at my table and who's never been here are the insurers. And I would actually challenge us to think about broadening our tables as we begin to think about translational social sciences, to begin thinking about bringing in the voice of people who pay for these treatments as we think about divining, you know, these new approaches forward. So this one is one that I overlooked, and I hope that folks here today will be able to learn from that. So I'm going to quote Atul Gawande by pointing out that, you know, in medicine, it took a long time to figure out you should wash your hands before you see your patient. So the issue about being able to make changes in treatment, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in thinking that we can actually go out there and change the world. We can't. It's not going to happen. That's not the pace at which things happen. The pace is slow. Here, these are the year over year deaths in LA County. This is from this year's data, showing that the orange bars are the totals, and you can see there's a slight decline in 2023 in dead people in LA County from drug use. But you can see that the proportion of fentanyl, meth, opioids, you can see that they continue to be pretty much ascending. There's not a lot of decrease there. So there's a few deaths that didn't happen last year, probably due to survivor bias. People who can't survive have learned to do that. But one of the mantras that I pull from this is I just did a back of the napkin of, 3,092 people died in 2023 from drug overdose. That averages between 8 and 9 people every day in Los Angeles County dying from overdose. So I just want to frame that because that's the era where we work. And to me, this is energizing. It makes it maybe as dark as my presidential candidate that I didn't want to win, but it's similarly dark. I mean, if you're one of those 8 or 9 people, it's like, it's not a good day for you. So the idea of being able to use that as a motivator. And so when I started the field in 1992, it was a different problem. And that was HIV relevant work for people who use drugs was where I was coming in. I'd just gotten my degree and I was like, going to work in HIV. I was ready to see all the injecting opioid users and make life right for them here in Los Angeles. And it turns out that people in LA who were becoming infected with HIV and dying from AIDS were linked to use of stimulants. And here is, you can't see it in the back, but it's a LA Times piece from 1992 saying that the overall mortality rate in LA County for HIV AIDS is 72%. So that's the sort of the mortality rate we were dealing with the HIV at that time. So as I'm entering the field, I'm thinking I want to do something around this. And the last thing that you need in the middle of a medical epidemic is a psychologist. So I was kind of thinking, what should I do? So I brought some people to the table, literally to the table, 101 Coffee Shop in Hollywood, which is a great place to go. Kathy Reback and I met. And we sort of talked about her observations. And she was talking about how that there was just this out of control HIV incidence and prevalence among gay men in Los Angeles who were using methamphetamine. This is 1992, 93. And at the time, Ferd Egan was around and said, Kathy, I'll fund you to do a qualitative study. Kathy is a sociologist, and she did this sentinel work that continues to today in terms of understanding the social construction of a gay drug and the way that methamphetamine fits in the lives of gay men in Los Angeles, not just from a pathological perspective, but to understand what is the functional place of this drug in people's lives. Today, it's all about the same, but there's an additional group you can see as we start at the top and go clockwise. There's gay men, there's shift workers. It costs a lot to live in LA. Many of my patients actually have to have 2 jobs to be able to live. So they use methamphetamine as a major energy source. People who are motorcycle riders and gang members will use methamphetamine to facilitate what they need to be doing. Women, at large numbers use methamphetamine. And the reason is to stay thin, to be able to clean your house, and to be interested in sex when your husband comes home. Methamphetamine is famous for letting you deal with time. And so people in rural areas and youth use it to just watch the clock pass. And then this is the new one as we come around the clock into the middle part here. And this is the homeless group. And the homeless group methamphetamine, especially in Los Angeles, but also in many US cities, is very popular because it helps people to stay awake at night when you're at peak danger for being rolled. So the idea here, again, and you can see over here the physical and psychological pluses and minuses, which even the minuses are good. The issue of the drug, when you pull the drug out of somebody's life, you leave a hole in the repertoire of behavior and the functioning, and it has to be addressed as you move forward. When I started working in the beginning to think about working around injection drug use in HIV, it was in 1992 when George W. Bush took office in 1988. The federal government drug control budget was around $5 billion. George Bush declared wars on drugs. It was the sharpest escalation that ended at 93 at $12 billion. And it was huge. It was a drug war, and George Bush funded it. he also was responsible for writing the differential sentencing laws for crack versus powder cocaine, which led to disproportional impact on Black and Latino people toward carceral settings. But he also started bringing research into the equation and said, you know, while he did all of this, he also set aside a large amount of money to start growing science in the field of addiction medicine. It had never been done before. Addiction prior to this time had been treated in a 12-step groups in community settings. And George Bush said, let's bring together the best minds in the country to figure that out. And that was where I came in 1992 with working with Walter Ling, who got some of this P50, one of the P50s. But I think it's also interesting to see that at the time in the drug war, this is a picture of an actual street billboard that talked about if you are addicted to drugs, you could get birth control and get $200 cash if you're a woman, which is pretty awful that this happened in the US, but hold on, it's going to happen again. So the idea of yeah, I expect very little of my leaders. Anyway, the HIV among people who inject drugs in the West, it turns out when I got to 1992 and I was ready to go to work, HIV was not in the methadone clinics. I worked with Doug Englund in 1992 at a methadone clinic, and there was nobody with HIV. It was fun, which was really funny because the whole clinic was funded on the HIV expansion interdiction, sort of trying to stop HIV spread among people who inject drugs, but there was no HIV. So it was one of those inside jokes of it allowed the clinic to be developed, but it wasn't, and it was under the HIV tab, but there was no HIV folks in the clinic. And because we're good at observing things, what I saw was that black tar is the reason why we don't have HIV among people who inject opioids in Los Angeles. We're going to lose some of that protection with fentanyl if people are using injection methods, but people who use fentanyl are actually using smoking methods more than injection now as a harm reduction approach that they've instituted themselves. So maybe HIV, maybe not HIV, but the point is that HIV is not in among people who inject opioids and never has been at a large amount in Los Angeles. So what I looked at, and there's a lot of stuff on this slide on the left, is Dan Ciccirone's argument that, you know, west of the Mississippi, there's very little HIV in people who inject opioids, whereas east of the Mississippi, it's Katie bar the door. But what I noticed, because I'm a scientist, is I noticed that a lot of these folks are smoking cigarettes. And so I thought, wow, I wonder what would happen if we start looking to see what happens if you actually address smoking among people who are in opioid maintenance. These are just more of the data showing that the HIV prevalence in clinics was not big. Also, I just want to point out that serendipity in my life is always great. So this is the building here, 5220 West Washington Boulevard. That's where the Matrix Clinic was, where I started. And then right next to it there, right, this picture here with the guard, that was what happened like a month after I started working. So was the Rodney King, I'm sorry, it was the Sylmar things that happened, and all of South Los Angeles went on fire. So that was our neighbor. So I was asking the question, so what happens if one intervenes on people who intervenes on smoking for people in methadone maintenance therapy? I got funded to do a 2x2 randomized controlled trial of 175 participants into one of 4 conditions. The 4 conditions were nicotine replacement therapy only, nicotine replacement therapy with relapse prevention, nicotine replacement therapy with the combination of the two, and then just counseling. So, and counseling was across all of the other conditions. So it was great. We used contingency management as well. And we saw that 73% of participants completed 12 weeks of nicotine replacement therapy plus assignment to behavioral condition. They loved it. Contingency management produced significantly higher rates of smoking abstinence than comparisons. though differences were not sustained at follow-up visits, and those with smoking abstinence were significantly less likely to use cocaine and other drugs. So this was the start of what I got into. I was like thinking I would be doing something more HIV relevant, but it wasn't. But because I'm there and because I have colleagues and I'm academically promiscuous, people came in and said, what happens if we look at the level of cigarette smoking by whether they're engaging opioid or cocaine use? And you can see on the right at the bottom, you can see that this is by the two sets of bars for opioids and cocaines, black and tan. You can see by heavy smokers on the left, chippers in the middle, and non-smokers on the right. And you can see that for both opioids and cocaines, you can see that the level of cigarette smoking corresponded with the likelihood that they have a new use of opioids and cocaine. And we also saw that that also was confirmed in urine, and this is in the heavy smokers and the chippers. You can see that the urinary cotinine is higher for the heavy smokers than the chippers, but you can see that it's all there. The ideas here are that by observing what's going on with people's use of cigarettes in methadone maintenance, you can begin to understand the links to other drug use and begin to think about how to intervene. It also allowed some opportunities for people who were in biostats. Xiaowei Yang was one of my first mentees to come in, and he was very interested in applying Bayesian analysis and other sorts of analyses to understand what are the missing data implications when you analyze trial data from RCTs when you have different assumptions on missing data. And he wrote a number of different papers on this sort of idea, but this early work established something that you can see in the literature today when you look for analysis of RCTs, which is sophisticated ways of managing missing data. Prior to this time, it was your choices were very grim, last observation carried forward, or you had the deadly complete case analysis. So, you know, neither of those are satisfying solutions, and Xiaowei was one of the first to kind of work with that. And it also brought me in touch with Tom Bellin and other folks here in public health who are in the biostatistical realm. Around the same time, because I was very interested and I had learned that HIV was not in the opioid group and instead was in the methamphetamine group, I started moving my work towards stimulants. Plus, the other thing is my mentor at the time is Walter Ling, who is the grandfather of, or the godfather certainly, of buprenorphine. So the idea of being able to build a career where he's working is sort of silly. So I needed to step out a little bit and really focused instead on stimulants. And so at that time, by that time, stimulants had become my people. And I was actually in these conversations in the county about how treatment works for people with stimulant use. You know, and so we moved our stimulant pharmacotherapy trial unit to Pizarro Treatment Center, which is near Echo Park. And it is now a building being developed into a 7-story, 90-unit condo complex. But we ran a number of trials out of there through NIDA-focused clinical research efficacy screening trials. Through this, we had a regular heavy group of folks who were regular users of cocaine coming in, signing up for randomized controlled trials. We were near Echo Park, so we were flyering around Echo Park at the time. And there's some really awesome stories that I can tell you about what you see when you go flyering around Echo Park even then. So it's a great place, but it was a good place to work. And we did a number of trials, and actually I led some efforts in this sort of approach. Here's my first positive signal for cocaine pharmacotherapy, and that's DHEA. One of the things I like to say when I talk to people who are learners is to embrace failure. This is an amazing failure of mine. I was able to show P less than 0.05 that 100 milligrams of DHEA every day actually facilitates you to use cocaine compared to placebo. So you can see over here on the right side, those gray dots, this is the proportion negative. The gray dots are placebo, and the black dots, proportion negative at the top through time is DHEA. So although it's only 11 and 12 people, the separation of the curves is remarkable. And so the DSMB shut this down after only 23 people had been enrolled, saying, Dr. Shoptaw, I think we've answered the question and we don't need to continue this. We also saw that consistent with this, DHEA significantly decreased craving for cocaine compared to placebo. And the reason for that is they didn't crave because they were using cocaine. So, it's a very fun idea that, when you're on the edge and you're out there trialing new ideas, that sometimes, even though folks like Dorota Majeska, who was at the National Institute on Drug Abuse and was really studying neurohormones and these sorts of approaches in managing stimulant use disorder, sometimes you find out things that are just crazy. So around the time Kathy and I were kind of thinking about the idea of using contingency management. Those of you who know us know that we speak a lot, and many of you have been infected by our contingency management ideas. Here's the two ways you do it. You do it with vouchers and cash on the right side, or you do a fishbowl on the left. This is Nancy Petrie, who was taken from us too early from cancer, but she's a contemporary of mine and I miss her a great deal. But it was her idea to have, instead of giving people access to cash, was to put slips of paper into a fishbowl, 100 slips, and 50 of them say good job, 30 of them are low prize, 17 medium prize, and 3 big prizes. And then people just increase the number of draws with successive negative urine samples for drug. So you get more and more draws to be able to reach into the fishbowl to get those prizes. Whereas on the right side, the vouchers and cash are how it works, where you have increasingly valuable reinforcers for successive samples of biomarkers of abstinence with bonuses. This on the right side is how it's being implemented here in Los Angeles County and in California widely. We use a voucher approach. So Kathy and I, here's the first clinic that I built. It's 6769 Hollywood, which is Friends Health Center. It's no longer there. It looked a lot cuter before when we had it, but it was a lovely place, and it was our first contingency management R01 under the tab of reducing stimulant use. Will address stimulant use HIV risk among gay and bisexual men in Los Angeles. And so here we had a 2x2 trial, contingency, cognitive behavioral therapy, a gay specific cognitive behavioral therapy, contingency management alone, just coming in and providing urine and getting dollars, and then contingency management plus CBT. And you can see here, there's a significant difference between the average number of negative UAs that are collected out of 48 visits. And we had them coming in 3 times a week, which we could do then. I don't think we could do that now. And in fact, we have people in the audience who've written papers to say, you can't do that now because it costs, people are just different. But you can see here that green there, that green one is significantly different than the CBT. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the standard treatment that's out there in terms of treatments. When you go looking for some stimulant use disorder treatment, you're going to be put in a group, or you're going to have a therapist who teaches you skills to not use. That is CBT. It is evidence-based and it is incredibly not powerful. But you can see that contingency management actually almost doubles the amount of negative urine you can produce just by having people come in, provide that urine sample, and if it's negative, provide that reinforcer. And then if it's positive, send the person home and say, just keep trying not to use, here's the money, here's what you can get. And there's no discussion of anything else in anybody's life except that. It's been a very strong line of work in my career. It's been moved into prevention settings. It's been moved into treatment settings. It continues to be strong in my career. So on the right side at the bottom, what we see here is unprotected receptive anal intercourse self-reports, average times over study weeks. And you can see that across all 4 conditions that we see a reduction of high-risk sex in gay and bisexual men in Los Angeles who use methamphetamine. So we got this twofer. We actually were able to institute treatment and be able to see reductions of substance use, but we also saw a reduction in high-risk sex, which really was a really strong piece of the work. And developing my work here in Los Angeles about bringing evidence-based treatments to people who don't have much. So I will take 1 second here to say off the cuff is one of the other things that happened during this time is that in Los Angeles, there are across the country as well, the primary driver of HIV incidence of negative men becoming positive, gay men, is methamphetamine use. It accounts for depending on the study, between a third to a sixth, between a sixth and a third of new incident cases in the US. So there's clear indication of what happens here. When it was 1994, 96, before 1996, I was actually in a meeting in West Hollywood at an elementary school talking about what are we going to do to address stimulant use and its driving HIV incidence in gay men in Los Angeles. And it was in that meeting that I actually heard someone say, one of the physicians say, I do not want any of your people, Steve, to participate in our trials for antiretroviral therapies because we know they're not going to take their medication and we don't want them in our studies. That was the first time that I really experienced the concept of addictive phobia in the health professions. Among us here, there's a healthy dose of addictive phobia. I can guarantee it. I see it every day that people think differently about our people, and I'll close that argument as we go further. But the issue of people with addictions having something about them that makes them not able to take top-tier treatments in our system is infused in our UCLA health system as well, then as it is now. So when I talk about find your people, sometimes you have to be the champion for your people because they don't have the voices to say, that's not right. Yeah, I should be in the study. If somebody's going to live, it should be me, not because I have a disorder. This sort of work and advocacy work with UCLA folks, Richard Rawson, the folks at ISAP, now contingency management is included as treatment in the VA health system, and it's also included here in California. The first round of work with Kathy has generated culturally tailored gay-specific treatment materials. We took cognitive behavioral therapy and we gated up. We made sure that all the references for cognitive behavioral therapy were specific to address cultural elements of gay culture, including things like addressing chemsex. When you've tried talking about chemsex to a heterosexual woman, you start to get the feel like, oh, she thinks I'm creepy, or that I'm going to be like, I'm taking this into a discussion area that makes her feel uncomfortable, which it does. But among gay men, talking about sex is not like that at all. You can actually have frank discussions. And if you don't have frank discussions, then you are going to encourage a bad treatment outcome. I'm the guy who has the data clinically that says if you don't talk about sex in that first session with a gay man, then the chances are good that he's going to go away and you're not going to see him again. So I always, in cognitive behavioral therapy land, will say to a patient first visit, I need you to go out and get laid however you can and not use methamphetamine before I see you again. So the idea here is that runs counter to every therapeutic intervention, most therapeutic interventions out there, because the idea is you need to put your sex life aside while you work on this substance use issue, which may work for many people, but if you're a gay man, you get identity and you define who you are by having sex with other men. If methamphetamine becomes imbued with sex and it becomes very difficult to pull that out, and in therapy, in intervention, you're not working on that, then you're missing the boat because that's central to the man and the man's life. And it's important to be able to figure that out. So these are the materials that sort of guide interventionists to be able to do that. No, it's been a lot of, let's move on. So one of the things that happened is we developed a lot of data. in this slide, we also saw this whole idea about methamphetamine and HIV and MSM. On the right side, you can see that that across levels of use, from a recreational user to a chronic non-treatment user to an outpatient user to a residential treatment person, these are the prevalence of HIV among the men that were about the time. This was a policy paper Kathy and I published that still is pretty relevant today. And thinking about segmenting where you are when you intervene, to begin thinking about what are the lessons we need to bring in about addressing methamphetamine use, what are the lessons we need to bring in about addressing HIV, and what are the lessons we need to bring in terms of cost. In our treatment field, we tend to think more expensive is better outcome, and actually it's kind of in the reverse, that the cheaper treatments actually have more effectiveness than the more expensive treatments. And so I'm also data driven, and when I'm talking with folks, I say, don't bypass the cheap stuff. Sometimes the cheap stuff can have the greatest impact. Start there and see what doesn't work, and then build on from there. That sort of philosophy earned us from Ferd Egan here again on the right, the idea that we would be able to tolerate being able to build a safe house facility where we would bring people who are actively using substance into housing, safe, decent housing, and be able to keep them housed, especially when their conditions are active. These are the units that were in place for 17 years. I was a volunteer executive director, and then the leadership at Friends Research sold my buildings to pay for the salaries of their C-suite. So, they made a movie out of it. They called it, or a musical, they called it Rent. It's the same thing. So it's like, it's been done in New York and Los Angeles. But these are some of the pictures of things that happened. And of course, high tolerance in Los Angeles, as we practice it, is not like how it's practiced in, say, Vancouver, BC at the Insight. This is not what it was. I mean, we didn't have people passed out on the stoop to their apartments. We would actually help that gentleman into his apartment. We would make sure that his shoes were off and that he had a glass of water sitting next to him so that when he woke up in the middle of the night, he could get something to drink, and then we would leave. That was sort of the high tolerance we did, not necessarily to be able to find ways to kick them out. During this time, we started observing a lot about how people use methamphetamine. This is a talk. I finally have this archival thanks to Michael Lee. We have the Weekend Warriors, where people are using Thursday, Friday, Saturday twice. The half-life to methamphetamine is 9 to 11 hours, so you only need to dose a couple times. And with continued use of methamphetamine, we also observe that men are unable to keep an erection. It causes a condition that one of my other, Dominic Frosch, mentees termed crystal dick. And so the idea of, you actually have this inability to, it makes sense. I mean, think about it. It's like, it's the cardiovasculature erections happen because, you're relaxed. And so it's parasympathetic. And so if you have the stimulant on board, it's going to close off that, and it's going to make it difficult to maintain the erection. So what we have instead now is we have the ED drugs. So that's why you get an invitation to a party on the weekend for a sex party. It'll have, a little, it may come with crystal, but it'll certainly have a blue pill. And then you slide into Sunday, you smoke some weed, a benzo, and you go back to work on Monday or Tuesday. Here's what shift worker looks like. I like this picture because it sort of tells you what the compartments are seeing, whether it's your heart, your cardiovasculature, whether it's your brain, whether it's your kidneys, and this is a once in a blue moon. And so the idea of how much you use actually has a lot to do with how much exposure you have to the systems. And you begin to think about what is the carrying capacity of substances. One of the things that's been most important is we did a CHIPS retreat on this, showing that continuing to learn, we brought in folks from Stanford, from pulmonology up there. We learned that methamphetamine and HIV are responsible for 50% of non-idiopathic cases of pulmonary arterial hypertension. So a particularly deadly disease. It's rare but deadly. Once you develop it, you're a goner. And so the idea here was to find out what happens with people who have PAH in these clinics. And I asked, how do you treat these guys? And the guys at Stanford said, You know what we do is we give these guys second or third tier treatment because we don't want to put the continuous infusion pump on them with the $300,000 per year drug, because we know that they'll just take that pump out and the drug and they'll sell it to be able to maintain their drug habit, which of course is not going to happen. But when they said that to me, it was like 1992 all over again. This is how it works in terms of the brains of people who are actually providers, is that this idea about people with stimulants, it infuses their thinking. What Michael and I figured out was that there is a strong and significant link between the level of social and health outcomes by how much you use methamphetamine. And in this very busy slide, and I'm sorry, you can see the circles are none, squares are monthly or less, and diamonds are weekly or more. And you can see that for all of these conditions, except for actually for all of these conditions, you can see that the frequency of use, none, monthly or less, corresponds with the likelihood that you'll have each of these conditions. So at that point, you know, we're kind of coming into contemporary times and thinking about, well, what kinds of medications might be working through this time. I was still working with medications. Maduka Trivedi and I did the ADAPT-2 trial, which for the first time with a 400 patient trial showed that people who were assigned to receive extended release naltrexone plus high dose bupropion daily were 11.1 percentage different points more likely to provide negative methamphetamine urine than placebo. And also we saw the significant sorts of differences that were significant on secondary outcomes. And here's something we don't understand, but the idea here, Jeremy Kidd at Columbia did a subgroup analysis of men who have sex with men and women. That's the bottom box over here, and men who have sex with women only. And you can see the number randomized over here. If you look over to the red box, you can see the treatment effects are almost 6 times higher for men who have sex with men and women versus men who have sex with women only compared to placebo. We don't know what that's about, but Jeremy actually wrote an R01 to this. It's being re-reviewed right now. And I'm hoping that using prospective logic, we can begin to unpack this. We also participated in some of the mirtazapine work. Here you can see the number needed to treat is 12 weeks is 8, and you can see about a 20% reduction of methamphetamine use when you use mirtazapine 30 milligrams a day. Very cool. And so, you know, we have, after 25 years, participated in bringing in these sorts of treatments, 2 treatments that have efficacy for methamphetamine. And there's also some work that's been done for cocaine use disorder, to the idea that we can change how clinicians can think by considering medication as a foundation for treatment of stimulant use disorder. Michael Lee has been doing some work now in terms of understanding, in community-wide work, understanding the links between stimulant use and housing instability in the probability of being virally suppressed. And you can see from this chart that people who have stimulant use and housing instability do not benefit as strongly in terms of staying suppressed as people who don't have those comorbidities. Practice-based improvements through the fellows. Now we have an addiction medicine fellowship, and I work with the fellows both within family medicine and also in internal medicine. And we've got implemented protocols. Now, the top one is that a nurse, when she sees a patient who has opioid use, signs of opioid withdrawal, she can implement a buprenorphine treatment without a doctor. It's in the protocol now, so that instead of them calling their friends who bring fentanyl and then they die in the hospital to manage their opioid withdrawal, we actually have a protocol in place. And Gio Cruz has created the first methamphetamine treatment clinic in pulmonary that we know of in the US. That's starting this month. So using, again, data to drive intervention, to push innovation, you know, to take what we know and make the systems better for our people. So what am I going to do next? We're finishing a study, HPTN-094. This is a randomized controlled trial of people to a mobile unit with an integrated care team compared to an intervention arm, which is just compared to the control condition, which is peer navigation only with a 26-week follow-up. Here's where we went in LA. We did it in 5 cities, LA, Houston, Philadelphia, DC, and New York. And you can see here, this is what we did. We ended up going to a lot of the places where people are housed, who have unstable housing. This is our bus. You may have seen this around town. This is a 33-foot medical van, fully equipped, that has nothing to do right now. So if you have an idea, come see me. I have a van, exactly. I have a van, and you don't have to ask anybody. You can just use it. So there's no like forms or anything. You know, what's next in stimulant pharmacotherapy? I will tell you, this is the most innovative thing that has come down the pike ever. This is Clear Scientific 1103. This is a chelating molecule. We're moving into 1B currently. This is a small molecule that removes methamphetamine from the human body. It actually just takes it, connects with the molecule, makes a complex, and takes it to the kidney and excretes it in urine. Within in laboratory animals, it can reverse lethal doses, 5-8 times lethal dose in 20 to 30 minutes. It's a very fast-acting chelator. It pulls methamphetamine out of tissue. It does not cross blood-brain barrier, and it works on passive diffusion to just pull methamphetamine out of the body and removes it. I think this is a game changer. Of course, we're going to push it first. For the indication will be for the emergency department suite. And my job with the company is to get it into patient hands. I think that this could be a really important drug to have on people's shelves who have periodic problems with methamphetamine use, so that if they have a weekend where they celebrate using this drug, they can take this CS 1103 on Sunday afternoon, and they can pass a urine test on Monday morning. So it actually could limit some of the negative, harmful effects that are social and otherwise in people. So what am I doing next? My group, I'm pushing us. It's like I have no more time left, literally and figuratively. So we have to move this along. You know, we need to address the 95% treatment gap. That's how many, only 5% of people who need treatment get it in their lifetime. We need to open the doors. We need to speed up, scale up. We need to broaden addiction treatment settings to pharmacy, especially for methadone. Methadone should be dispensed in pharmacies. To intensive medical settings, be able to work on stimulant use. That's a primary driver of violence in our box here. Primary care, to deliver care with cultural competence. This is a major issue. We need work, folks. We need to talk among ourselves to understand how addictophobia works, to change the way we think about the people in front of us, and then address comorbidities using whole person models. I will tell you, I continue to live, to learn. So on the morning when I was walking in today, I saw this guy on the street, and he's like this, and then he does this. You know what that means? That is fentanyl. Fentanyl actually causes people's muscles to harden, and so when you're on the street and you're really high, you do this. And so when you're seeing people like this on the street, have the naloxone ready. So I'll stop there.
Regarding, you didn't go to cannabinoid. You didn't mention anything about cannabinoid because these are one of the addicting substances. And the other one is fentanyl, which kills. Is it possible to taper down, reduce what they are taking through anesthetics? I mean, for instance, there are some anesthetics, long-range anesthetics that will wean them out of it, like ketamine. Ketamine is anesthetic, am I right? Yeah, ketamine is anesthetic. I mean, it could be used at a low dose and to wean them out of it. So there are 2 points which you didn't speak about. Cannabinoid, you spoke about the omega-3. I don't know whether you spoke about the omega-3. Omega-3 in cannabinoid seeds is very good for the nervous system. the covering of the neurons, oligodendrocytes. So these abnormal electrical charges in the brain lead to aberrant behavior and aberrant use of these synthetic dangerous stimuli.
That's a great question. First of all, cannabinoids, I think I'm all in on cannabinoids. The control data for this is not strong. We don't have the protocols out there yet, but it's a really good idea. I would support that. We are running a trial right now in our center on ketamine as a treatment for people with methamphetamine use disorder. More on that later. I also like the idea in Australia, what they're doing is they're starting with 250 milligrams of Lisdex and bringing people down 50 milligrams every day as a way of being able to bring people's tolerance down. So starting with a stimulant, Lisdex is a prodrug for amphetamine. So it's like the idea of starting at a high dose and then coming down every 50 milligrams. More to learn about that. But it is in the field and that's ongoing. So those are really good ideas and I support you. If you want to, I do have the big Southwest node of the CTN here and it would be a great idea. If you want to write up a concept sheet to do that, let's talk. Yeah.
I really loved your talk, Steve. That was fantastic. I'm curious about the CS1103, if I got the number right, but I think it's an amazing drug that it's actually able to like chelate the drug to get it out of the system. But I'm just also thinking about withdrawal. So does it actually, do we know anything about whether or not it triggers a significant withdrawal, or do these people actually go through significant withdrawal?
We don't know. I mean, so this is the cool thing about research, right? We don't know. We do know that in the phase 1A trial, the healthy students I guess it was in Boston where they did the trial, no problems at all, no differences in any sort of enzymes, neurotransmitters, nothing measured. I would imagine that we're going to see some differences in people in terms of triggering withdrawal, but in laboratory animals, they go back to normal behavior. And of course, the models aren't parallel between, preclinical models of withdrawal. They don't map, I don't think, very well on humans. So the right answer to that is, I don't know, but we're going to be looking. We're starting hopefully in, I don't like hope as a strategy, but January or February, we will have our first treatment of 30 milligram injected methamphetamine followed by a CS1103 chaser to see what happens. So more later, but I would imagine that there will be some withdrawal, but the emergency room docs are very excited about this because the primary presentation of people showing up in the emergency room is agitation. And so if you pull the drug off board, as opposed to medicating it with a with a strong tranquilizer, like a
Benzo, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or even benzos, you don't have to bomb these guys with benzos. If you just pull that off board, give those guys a little bit of something to feel better, maybe with their tummy or maybe with whatever they're feeling, you can send them home in a couple hours as opposed to having to let them sleep in the emergency room for 12 or 15 hours. So that's their very much interest. So we'll see.
Thank you.
Sure. And it is a very exciting drug. It's like the best thing ever.
I'm coming.
Thank you. I didn't see any in demographic data, but in thinking in the way forward and how you ended, I'm curious to know if you would be considering working with directly with Native communities, and if so, what barriers would you see in working with Native communities?
I am academically promiscuous. So I would say, sure, let's work. There's a table, there's a seat. I think the issue is, I don't think I've had some interactions with Native people here in town, but I not people who have that can broker the link that it works. So I've worked with Dan Dickerson at ISAP and I've had a couple other interactions with folks who are from the American Indian community, but not been able to successfully do that. I don't see any problems, but I've worked with all kinds of groups. It's just, it's a different culture. So I've worked with Black men. I know that culture. I worked with Latino men. I know that culture, and they're different, right? But, and it all is a little different in how it lays out. So sounds fun.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. This has been really awesome, and I really appreciate you spending the time with us. We just have just a couple more minutes. Any other reflections, questions for our esteemed speaker?
All right.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks, guys.